Good morning, everybody, or good day or good evening, depends where you're watching us today. Welcome to this presentation of the PBL report. And my name is Alexandra Tkachenko. Today, I'm going to moderate this discussion on behalf of many organizations that are involved in making this event happen that you could see on our screen. And there are a few house rules that I would like to mention right in the beginning, just quickly. This session is bilingual, so if you want to choose the language, please check on the bottom right the interpretation button, and there you could choose either English or Ukrainian section. The questions would be addressed in the end of the presentation, and you can type them in a chat. There would be a link shared for this report. You could find it also in the chat. And this session is going to be recorded, so you know that you've been recorded. And for the agenda, we will start with the forward report presentation. Then we will have a feedback from the experts, then the Q&A session, and the closing word. And this event wouldn't happen without the help of the Netherlands embassy. And I would like to invite for the forward, the Janez de Mol, the ambassador of the Kingdom of the Netherlands to Ukraine. Mr. Janez, please, the floor is yours.
Okay, good morning, Alexandra. It's good to see you again, dear colleagues. It's a pleasure to be with you. Last week, I've been traveling through Khersonska, Zaporizhzhia, and Dnipropetrovska oblasts. And once again, it revealed the enormous scope of destruction caused by the unprovoked Russian aggression and atrocities in Ukraine. And endless amounts of damaged buildings near the former front line, schools, houses in residential areas, critical infrastructure, quite a lot. There was this immense suffering of people because of the Russian shelling, the stories, the traumas, because of violence. And yes, at the same time, there is this incredible Ukrainian resilience and bravery, as well as 100% belief and trust in victory by the Ukrainian armed forces. Everybody understands that this is the time to act. If not now, then when? As said, it's all about people, as people are the most valuable resources in every country, and even so more in a country that is fearlessly fighting for its future, freedom, and cultural identity. We all know that the statistics are bad. Because of the war, currently some 6.5 million of IDPs are all around Ukraine. And approximately, I think 7 or 8 million of its citizens are abroad. These people have to come back, one way or another, to support and rebuild the country. As the government states, the danger of a brain drain is real. And for that, however, you need decent conditions that would enable Ukrainians to come back and return. In my view, personally, safe, affordable housing is surely one of them. In simple terms, you need a roof above your head to be able to settle and a school for the children in the vicinity. Moreover, demining of the lands in order to be able to sow and harvest and a repaired school to bring back your kids to the village are crucial. So far, I've seen mainly elderly people live in the villages. The future of the country, of the countryside, is actually at risk. Well, I'm not telling you anything new here, most likely. The World Bank Rapid Needs Assessment says, in terms of recommendations, a national program for the repair, reconstruction, and recovery of the housing sector is crucial. Such a program will align all different stakeholders under a unified umbrella that could support Ukraine's agenda for European Union accession, facilitate return of IDPs and refugees, and ensure a healthy recovery of the housing sector. Well, if you think of it, systemic planning of reconstruction along with further development of the country provides, in theory and hopefully also in practice, a unique opportunity to rethink, redesign, modernize not only buildings, but the whole livelihood system, and thus ensure a comprehensive transformation of territorial communities and regions. Building back better is not only a nice soundbite, but it's actually a condition without which we cannot act. A good beginning, in my humble view, would be to set up a Ukrainian national social housing plan, providing affordable basic apartments, providing reconstruction facilities, adapting the financial mortgage market, and creating jobs. It's all about jobs, you know. You need to have income to be able to do something. Rebuilding a place to call home is a very good beginning, and I'm very impressed by the report, as I was by this session in the Netherlands, and I would like to compliment the organizers. I was really inspired by the session which we had in The Hague. The Netherlands keeps assisting wherever possible, and I mentioned in The Hague, it's militarily, humanitarian, financial, economic, and also in the field of accountability. But we also try to help in this field by creating courses, helping with the establishment of this recovery plan, etc., etc. And we will continue to do so. But ladies and gentlemen, let's be honest. The proof of the pudding is in the eating. It is time for action. There are a lot of reports, there are a lot of strategies, and I know it is important. But at the same time, having traveled to the Southeast, it is time to act. People are now waiting for things to happen, and they are willing to act. The resilience is important, is incredible, but they need support, because without our support, nothing will happen, unfortunately. And Kiev is far, far away for these people. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's time to act. I'm not going to keep you up any longer. Congratulations on the report. It's impressive. Take care. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's true. It's time to act. And as in all our events, we always try to have two voices, international and of course Ukraine, because you cannot talk about Ukraine without Ukrainian voices. And we did claim that Alexandra Zarkhina will join us today, but because of some unforeseen circumstances, she couldn't make it today. And we are happy that Halina Bonder joined us today to represent Ukrainian officials. And Halina Bonder is architect and member of the Ukrainian parliament. Please, Halina, the floor is yours.
Добрий день.
Good day, dear colleagues. My name is Anna Bonder. At present, I am a People's Deputy, and I represent the Committee on Reconstruction of Ukraine. Dear colleagues, good day to everyone. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to participate today and to express my sincere gratitude for giving me an opportunity. And I am impressed by the support produced by the Netherlands, both financial and technical. This report, which we are going to discuss today, is an important step towards reconstruction of housing in Ukraine in terms of creation of new neighborhoods, providing variety and decent living for all sorts of people. Our challenges are now addressed together with other European-wide challenges, and we need now to align our legislation to European ones so that we will not need to align it later when we're joining the European Union. And I'm sure that all administrative bodies will support us in the development of the efficient housing legislation. Funding challenges are resolved by many international bodies now, but we must really take action now because our armadas need to use the financial tools right now. As head of the working group on developing the urban code of Ukraine, I would like to say that the topic of housing is going to be very actively addressed by all our participants, and it will be aligned, I hope, with the work of our sponsors and the National Administration of Ukraine. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to the presentation of the report.
Thank you, Hannah. And all of this wouldn't happen without the initial initiative from the PBL, the Netherlands Environmental Agency, Assessment Agency. And that's why I would like to invite for the forward Andrea van Lemmeren, the Deputy Director of PBL.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for the opportunity to make a few opening remarks. It is good that there is a follow-up of the session that we had a couple of months ago. On Wednesday, February the 15th, we organized in The Hague the Ukraine's Housing Recovery Forum, Rebuilding a Place to Call Home. There was a lot of interest for that meeting. Over 400 people from all over the world registered to attend this meeting. And of course, PBL, could only organize this in close cooperation with Ukrainian specialists in the Netherlands and in Ukraine itself. The aim of the event was sharing knowledge for action. And in the report that you see on your screen, this gives a good description of what was discussed in that meeting. And even more, the authors draw lessons from that event and elaborate further on them. I have read the report with great pleasure. It gives an inspiring overview of several best practices in Europe for rebuilding cities that have suffered from war. It's a report of hope. For me, the main conclusion is that it is possible and that it will be done to rebuild destroyed cities. Several best practices are identified and described that can be used for rebuilding the Ukrainian cities. The challenge now is to identify the options that will work for you in your specific situation. There is not one simple solution that you can simply cut and paste. It has to fit your demands, fit your history, fit your culture, fit your landscape, etc., etc. Many choices will have to be made, and it is not purely technocratic exercise. As a director of an institute that works on the science policy interface in the Netherlands, I am very much aware that many of these choices are political choices, and these have to be prepared carefully by the science and research community. Alternative options will have to be looked at, brought into the discussion, and the pros and drawbacks have to be analyzed for your situation in Ukraine. At this point of time, however, it's clear that the political debate in Ukraine is focused on the terrible war. How to win this and how to end this war is top priority. But sooner or later, and I understand from Jens, it's up to do it already now. The focus will shift to rebuilding your cities. And I think it's up to you and also to us, but in a more supporting role, to prepare for this phase. Make sure that the pathways for doing this are prepared and ready. Make sure that you know what are the critical choices that will have to be made by your politicians. Show them so when the time comes, these decisions can be made rapidly. Your call for action, which was also emphasized by Jens in his presentation, which is the topics for today, sounds as a logical and necessary step in preparing for this process. So I wish you all a very productive meeting, and I'm very sorry that I have to leave after this opening session, but my agenda was already full. But be aware that from PBL's point of view, we are more than willing to contribute to the next steps as much as possible to prepare for rebuilding a place that you call your home. So I wish you a very productive meeting, and thank you very much for this possibility to say a few words.
Thank you very much, Andrea. And now we are moving to the main content of this meeting, and I would like to invite the team of authors to present their impressive work, and starting with Pavlo Fedorev, who is a lead researcher at New Housing Policy. Please, Pavlo, the floor is yours.
Всім доброго дня. Ще раз вітаю вас.
Good day, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so very much for joining our session today. This report, which we are presenting to you today, is a logical continuation of the work that has been done in this topic, specifically the serious reports on housing and municipal governance, and also two more editions of the rapid damage and need assessment provided by the World Bank. We are developing on this platform, and we are focusing on housing. Our report consists of several parts, the first being the development of the presentation of the context. Why are we talking about housing at all when we're talking about reconstruction of Ukraine? At present, it is rather difficult to assess the degree of damage that Ukraine has sustained, but we are sure that it is for the first time in years that Europe witnesses such devastation. Around 1.5 million incurred damages, and 1.5 million houses are damaged. 1/3 is destroyed beyond repair. 60% of Ukrainians, IDP Ukrainians, are now renting private housing. And this winter, half of these 60% expressed their difficulties in finding funds for paying the rent. So we understand that their need for housing is going to grow. To respond to these challenges, Ukraine, together with its international partners, has used new solutions. You could see container cities, you could see, and I think you are aware of transformation of public facilities into temporary housing for IDPs, including gyms, including hotels, etc. And last year, Ukraine has been presented with a recovery plan, which included 150,000 residential units to be built during the next 10 years, but unfortunately it is not formalized. Also, Ukraine has presented the system of vouchers for damaged and destroyed housing, but so far we do not have any mechanism or funding sources to finance this model. On the part of the EU countries, the major support was provided in terms of adaptation and expansion of the capacity to host Ukrainian IDPs. Also, the EE Fund, Energy Efficiency Fund, has been re-channeled to provide funding for reconstruction. So, we have heard it today, and this discussion continues, and the slogan is, we must do better than we had before the war. And my question would be, and what did we have before the war? The challenges which I have presented to you mean that these challenges are there on the systemic basis. They are systemic problems that Ukraine used to face before the war too. Massive cost-free privatization turned practically all Ukrainians, up to 93% of Ukrainians, into private house owners. And it means that the society of homeowners have low incomes resulting from privatization and cannot maintain their housing. And this system was sustained through subsidies, and also this system was based upon the households which cannot sustain themselves due to low income of their owners. Despite the growing subsidies, the overall condition of housing was deteriorating. The subsidies were not uniformly allotted across the regions, and only around 20% of multi-story buildings got the subsidies before the war, and we can imagine that this proportion is now even lower, because part of the subsidies were provided in the Donetsk and Luhansk regions before the war. And the result is that 40% of households were living in housing with no major repairs ever done.
Наступний слайд.
And
Власне, відсутність чіткої
actually, the lack of a clear policy in terms of housing, a lack of understanding and a concept for social housing, and shifting the blame and the responsibility onto the hromadas results in the fact that hromadas do not have either the capacity or the financial resources to deal with the issue. And just over 1,000 social housing units were erected nationwide before the war. So that is, of course, a meager figure. And the private sector, though growing, especially in big cities, still is poorly regulated and didn't provide for tenants' security. And so the tenants were discriminated and often faced the danger of expulsion and eviction. So spatial planning and new housing became a real challenge, because a huge proportion of neighborhoods has never been renovated, and today we lack solutions and planning instruments to regulate the ownership so that we could even approach this problem. Another thing was that we are still practicing the quantitative approach, focusing on the square meters of residential housing. And this means that we're still lacking instruments of spatial planning that would be fit for purpose for specific needs and goals in housing. And also, we do not have the streamlined procedure for arranging competitions for developers, etc. Besides everything that I have mentioned, the problem is not only in the lack of instruments, but also in the lack of competence to use the available ones. The strategic documentation is rather outdated in Ukraine. Also, we have no clear hierarchy and of documents between recovery plans. And the most important thing is that a lot of research and assessments show that hromadas are lacking qualified personnel capable of managing spatial projects. And this is something that exacerbates the housing crisis. To summarize, the immense scale of destruction requires coordination of our efforts and resources. The current housing policy reproduced unsustainable ownership structures, and it wouldn't guarantee housing stock maintenance or choice for people in access to housing. And the key thing here is that hromadas, who are going to be the key actors in reconstruction, need new instruments, resources, and guidance to develop housing. To provide for efficient reconstruction, we must a systemic approach and a comprehensive reform of housing policy. Julia, the floor is yours.
Let me quickly introduce Julia Lawson. Julia Lawson is Professor Julia Lawson is international urban and housing researcher at RMIT University, and she will share with us some international experience.
Thanks, Alexandra. And thank you, Pavlo. It's been a great privilege to work with you and Alexandra on this report. I also am sure that Edwin, who's in the US today, would also agree. So moving ahead to the next slide. Moving ahead to the next slide. This was Rotterdam in 1944, which thankfully is now a thriving harbour city and gateway for West European trade.
Ici, c'est parfait, monsieur. Merci. Bonne journée.
Perhaps some of the microphones could be put out just during the talk, please. It also has a proud history of neighbourhood recovery and hosts some of the world's most exciting urban design. In the 1940s and 50s, the UN Economic Commission for Europe provided key technical assistance to many countries devastated by war, like the World Bank is doing so today, and UNEC as well. It provided reports on housing needs and how to finance them. It promoted a concept then of non-profit housing, often involving municipalities benefiting from very long-term public finance. This approach to recovery in their 1951 report was accelerated by the Marshall Plan funds in Austria, Germany, France, the UK, and especially the Netherlands. Through this dedicated process, cities such as Rotterdam and Vienna were able to quickly provide homes for displaced residents and to reinvigorate collapsed local economies. This effort overcame the backlog in housing conditions since the Depression years. European reconstruction funds, or Marshall funds, were allocated to countries via the Paris headquarters under agreements with countries that also reformed their housing systems. This involved knowledgeable and extensive level of cooperation. There were more than 600 people working in the Paris office at the time. Through this effort, governments were able to rehabilitate their collapsed economies and create much improved living conditions. This is what building back better meant then, following the turbulent years before and also after the war. So what can we learn from this? The scale of effort involved considerable public leadership and investment which reshaped markets and improved housing standards. There were three important tools which were key for driving recovery. Firstly, serious commitment to multi-level agreements over the scale and purpose and use of investment to address the massive housing need. Secondly, strong commitment to urban planning. And thirdly, maximum use of mission-focused municipal and non-profit housing developers to ensure that building was back better. We can draw lessons from this as well today. Good governance takes political will. To move to the next slide. Good governance takes political will and capable human capital. And that is what, in our view, is needed also for Ukraine. Today, there are many well-established tools that are across Europe that have their roots in these early efforts, and they continue to bear fruit today. Many of these policy tools were covered in the UN report Housing 2030 with partners UNEC, UN Habitat, and Housing Europe. This report draws on those illustrations that were most relevant to Ukraine's recovery needs and aspirations as outlined in its draft recovery plan, which were presented in Lugano and will soon be again in London. Many of these were presented in the event in The Hague. Firstly, Finland's National Housing Agency. Secondly, Helsinki's multi-level and multi-actor agreements for housing and transport infrastructure. Thirdly, the Netherlands with its active land policy addressing infrastructure and housing needs. Fourthly, Vienna's securing land for diverse neighbourhoods through its Land Bank Housing Zone Fund, and also Austria's overarching legislation, which sets out the operating model for limited profit housing in that country, which is, of course, the OECD's best practice. Denmark also has its long-term revolving fund that sustains investment over generations. Moving on. The following slide concerns a dedicated housing agency. You may recall Director Jarmo Linden, who spoke at the event in The Hague. ARA implements the government's housing policy in Finland, primarily focusing on supply-side policy. It aims for sustainable and affordable and inclusive housing, and it's probably one of the best examples across Europe of an agency that's been able to promote housing first and reduce homelessness. It delivers grants, subsidies, guarantees related to housing construction and the renovation of housing as well. It guides and uses and monitors those who receive those subsidies and is involved directly in promoting housing development projects and innovation. It does research as well and oversees energy performance certificates. So it has many very, very constructive roles and works underneath the Ministry of Environment. Moving on. At the event in The Hague, Jarmo also explained about multi-level approach to funding outcomes and how nationally collected resources were combined with local capacities to be spent where they were needed. National municipal agreements generate win-win outcomes on land use, housing, and public transport. Finland applies these agreements over very long periods, 30 years, and sets agreements with municipalities for their spatial plans and the contributions it will make towards achieving affordable housing supply and necessary social infrastructure, because those costs are often beyond those able for municipalities to bear. So partnership is key. Moving forward. The following slide concerns the importance that recoveries have clear rules and processes. Land policy is key to orderly development, which is in the public interest. And the recovery of Rotterdam involved local land acquisition, reassembly, infrastructure provision, and allocation for development. Investment from national funds via municipal and non-profit private housing associations were key to delivering a range of housing and inclusive neighbourhoods. And this role continues today. In fact, in Rotterdam, half of the homes there are actually non-profit rental. Helsinki was also able to shape its own destiny under the national law, which was in place since 1945, which allowed the city to play a more active role in land acquisition and development promotion. It now owns 70% of the land which surrounds Helsinki and paces development to suit needs, working with the national government through these multi-level agreements to ensure infrastructure is in place, such as schools, transport, and so on. In the report, Professor Edwin Boutelaar also writes about how the Netherlands has long managed its land resources effectively, and of course has achieved world acclaim for this. It's taken an active approach to recover Rotterdam, and more recently, a facilitative and negotiating approach, working closely with communities and also with non-profit private housing associations. Also speaking at the event was Michelle Kauer from the city of Vienna. She talked about Vienna's role. We move forward. Good outcomes. Good outcomes start with a good plan. This report explains how strategic plans and planning instruments such as zoning, as well as development competitions and development agreements, produce the optimum outcomes for residents of the city. These tools will be crucial in ensuring Kiev and other cities and many other cities build back better. If we move forward again, it really aids the recovery efforts to have good partners in the redevelopment of the housing stock. In all these examples that I've mentioned, in Finland, in the Netherlands, and in Denmark, and in Austria, they involve partners whose mission was affordable housing. These providers take a variety of forms across Europe, from private non-profits and cooperatives to municipal housing companies. They manage around 25 million homes in Europe, around 11% of dwellings across the continent. And these homes are not just for the very poor. In Austria, they are also eligible for almost 80% of the population. These providers were crucial in social and economic recovery efforts in rebuilding Rotterdam, Vienna, and Helsinki. They ensured that there were no white elephants or stranded assets, just good, affordable housing that offered secure homes. Moving forward, there are clever ways to design housing finance system. And Denmark provides another example of how this can be done. What is especially good about the Danish model is the reinvestment of tenants' rent in continuing improvements over time. These surpluses are accumulated in what is now a very large national housing fund called BL, or Landbyggefonden. This has been called on in that country, Denmark, to play a counter-cyclical role, most recently post-COVID, when needed, acting as an economic shock absorber and promoting innovation too. To round up now, if we move to the following slide, purposeful leadership on housing and good governance is crucial, but at all levels. But what drives this is also human capital and political commitment of the need to plan for and to implement recovery efforts. Land policies can reduce chaos and ensure public interest outcomes. Specially designed circuits of investment can focus and accelerate needed investment, but can also retain those profits or surpluses for further growth and improvement. We give examples in this report of an established national agency, ARA, that's been there for 70 years, needs-based capital investment strategies in various countries that dedicate loops of funding for particular purposes. Also of multi-level and multi-actor agreements, which have a long duration, which have a win-win outcome. The report talks about land policy instruments that work in practice and plan for inclusive neighbourhoods with a variety of housing needs. We also give explanation of the legislation for better social housing models, which are more sustainable and inclusive than those that currently operate in Ukraine. We talk about how funds can be sustained and public investment can go further through revolving funds, rather than perhaps complex or customised or costly, more extractive commercial models. So we ask, keep it governable and build civic trust and pride in the recovery effort. I now hand the baton over to Alexander Anisimov, who will take the opportunity to apply some of these ideas and his deep understanding of the context to application in the Ukrainian context. Thanks, Alexander.
Отже, всім вітання. Я сподіваюся,
Welcome everyone. I hope that everyone can hear me. So I'm going to present the third part of our report, really, based on an understanding of the context and the institutional challenges and recovery challenges that are faced by Ukraine. We understand that innovation, social reform are essential for our situation. We will be not able without them to do something better than the things that we have in house and we had before the war. So I would like to present to you the six-partite cycle, and each recommendation in the cycle will strengthen the previous one. These recommendations are hardly of multiplying effect if they are implemented independently. And so the umbrella for all these recommendations is the affordable and sustainable housing embedded in the livable context. So the first element of our six-partite reform is a national framework, which consists of several sub-elements, including a national housing strategy, which has been already mentioned today, and which was mentioned in the World Bank report, so that we could pull together all the actors and formulate the ultimate goal for our reconstruction of housing. We understand also that we have challenges that must be faced with a strong national housing strategy and legislature, and we must have it as soon as possible. The second part here is regulations guiding non-profit and public housing. This part is rather weak in Ukraine now, and we are suggesting creating non-profit cooperatives, non-profit housing companies, which can give proposals for IDPs and other households. On the other hand, it is not going to work really unless we have national governance and funding at the top level. And of course, here we understand that we need one or another form that is going, agency that is going to be the umbrella for all these processes, an overarching body like the national agency. We already have some premises for forming such a national agency, which would approve the decisions at the national level. And of course, we understand that the relevant funding, which could be provided by the National Housing Fund, is essential for the implementation of our housing policies. So, National Housing Fund must be established, and it must be operating the funds we get from reparations and other sources. And of course, we would like also to strengthen the digitalization in Ukraine and the DREAM system, which was recently presented by the ministry, and which is an important step towards recovery in Ukraine. And so we need a clear centralized system. And this system must be based upon a new approach for tenants, and the tenants must have their legal status improved. They must be protected against unprofitable contracts, and this is an important part to protect all the IDPs that we are having now in Ukraine, but also the overall framework requires it for the sake of the better system. Another side to this topic is a better housing stock management, because we have a lot of houses which are damaged, and unfortunately the HOA reform cannot be now implemented efficiently, and we need to reframe it and to provide realistic housing stock management. And of course, in terms of implementation, we must have the support of our European partners, and this can be done through the Energy Efficiency Fund. And this could be one of the ways to assess the quality of space or housing space, and if we want to depart from the quantitative approach dealing in square meters. And another very important step is land use planning, because all the houses are not just suspended in the air. To create high quality neighborhoods, we must strengthen the legislature for land use planning, and now this legislature or these instruments are practically never used by the hromaders. And this legislature must focus on social housing, housing as such, and also because we are dealing with the issue of modernizing Soviet-style neighborhoods, we must also review what we have now, and we must also review the available housing stock and the available investment. And finally, the last step, but it's not least definitely, is the municipal mandate and capacity, their ability to implement the policy that they need to achieve good housing. And here we see that we must streamline housing procedures and guidelines, and we must work with hromaders, because hromaders now are pretty lost in this topic, and they do not have enough instruments to control their housing funds. And this also includes, of course, land management, and which was already mentioned by my previous speakers. And these are the instruments that must be given to hromaders, and hromaders must be trained in the use of such instruments as land management and housing finance. Also, of course, another step is establishment and upgrade of municipal housing companies, and this can provide for the emergence of long-lasting sustainable housing, which would meet the needs of the people who live in such buildings. And finally, of course, we must engage civil society so that non-profit organizations would become the key actors in the process, and so that we could attract more international investors. So to bring our report to a conclusion, I would like to say that we should aim at being partners together with the state, with non-profit organizations. We must aim at having, instead of isolated projects which could strengthen inequality across hromaders, instead of such isolated projects, we must create a system at the national level which would identify the vision and the specific objectives for municipal housing, which would be supported by efficient land use policy, which would be implemented by the key actors, and which would be sustainable and funded by the available financial instruments aimed at mutually beneficial well-being goals for IDPs and hromaders in general. And we need this system to become the starting point for the recovery of Ukraine. Thank you very much. I guess that it is time for me to give the floor back to our moderator.
Thank you very much, Pavlo, Julie, and Alexander, for this comprehensive report, and where you presented us today the overview of the current state, the references for to challenge the situation we have now, and the practical proposals. And in order to give a push for the report to be even more practically beneficial for the Ukraine recovery, we would like to invite the field experts to give their feedback on this report. And therefore, I would like to invite Anastasia Bobrova, representative CEDOS think tank, to give her feedback on this piece of work. Anastasia, the floor is yours.
Welcome everyone. Alexandra, thank you very much for the invitation and for having me today. And I think this is a very important event to have such a report and so full of ideas and solutions, and it is good for us to have it in Ukrainian and to have the opportunity to discuss. I would like to say a few things. We need to focus on the capacity building at the national and local levels, because for us to depart from crisis suggested solutions, we must develop the institution of housing. What can we see now? We have a gap in this sphere, and unfortunately, any good idea will stay unrealized unless we bridge this gap and provide a comprehensive strategy for its implementation. I'm really sorry that we do not have today the representatives of the Ministry of the Development of the Communities, Territories and Infrastructure. Maybe I have missed somebody in the audience, because I would really like to hear their feedback, because these are the people who would bear the responsibility for implementing this solution. And I would really like to hear about their difficulties and challenges. On my part, I would like to say that really today, Ukraine doesn't have the legislative framework at the national level. We do not have a specific agency that will overarch and cover all the housing projects. And I would like to see more human resources invested into this sphere. Now we are at the juncture. On the one hand, the war is raging. On the other hand, we have already started the recovery, and our solutions, our decisions will impact the future. So I would like really to see more attention for the topic of housing at the national level. And talking about the municipal level, I agree, many Hromadas are not yet ready to assume the responsibility for housing. There are many reasons for that. One has already been mentioned. There is a lack of human resources, competences, and I guess this is the sphere which we can apply our forces to. And we must educate, we must share knowledge and experience with those who need it most. And then they will be able to implement the solutions that we discuss. And we do need the institutional support. We do need the range of instruments that could be used to manage housing now and in the future. And Hromadas just cannot see it, and they cannot see the best practices. They are unaware of them, and that is why Hromadas are facing this challenge. And this is the area in which we can support them. And two more things. I think they were not yet mentioned today. The first one is about data and information. Today, I represent the organization which analyzes policies, which collects data, CIRAS. And today, we are not well aware of the housing situation in Ukraine. We are not very knowledgeable about the challenges each household is facing. So we know little about things happening in the private sector, in the problems faced by tenants. And without the data, we cannot develop good arguments and outline progressive solutions. And finally, space, platforms, and I am really glad that we have this space, this platform to exchange experience and knowledge, to discuss our problems and challenges, to bring together the representatives of municipalities and international organizations, researchers, and public figures. I hope that we will have more platforms like this. And I would like to invite all of you to our Ukrainian Urbanism Forum to be conducted in Vinica on the 28th, 29th of June, and it will also be a platform to discuss housing and sustainable decisions connected to housing. And of course, we will do some reflection on the way we have covered during this year of war. So once again, thank you very much for this report. It is a very powerful publication in Ukrainian, and thank you for inviting me, everyone.
Thank you, Anastasia. And I would like to invite Karolina Linkton-Bilin, Deputy Representative in Ukraine at United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, to give her feedback on this report. Sorry, Alexander, we don't hear you.
Dear colleagues, there is some problem with the sound, so вибачте, шановні колеги.
Можливо, попросимо Олександра почекати тоді?
Shall we ask the speaker to wait a bit and to fix the technical issue?
Then we will go to the following speaker, and while Alexander will fix his technical things on his side. And therefore, we would invite Gulnara Rol, Secretary to the Committee of Urban Development, Housing and Land Management at the United Nations Economic Commission to Europe.
Thank you so much, Alexandra. And thank you so much for the sharing report and also for the discussion in the Netherlands. There was so much of the interesting presentations, and I think the report also is very important. United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, which I represent, is an intergovernmental organization with 56 member states, where Ukraine is a very active member, where both the national government is working very actively, but also the local government are engaged through the UN Forum of Mayors. We therefore worked with Ukraine on the housing sector for many years. And just to remind you that in 2013, UNEC, together with the ministry, developed the country profile. So this is probably, you don't see this publication, the country profile on the housing land management. In 2018, following the publication, and while we were reviewing the implementation of these policy recommendations, we also conducted with a group of senior government experts from EU member states draft laws on rental housing and housing relations. What we see is that many of those recommendations are actually still very relevant and very much in a way echoing the conclusions of the report which was presented today. At the moment, we're working in Ukraine since 2002 April on two initiatives in the cities of Kharkiv and Mykolaiv. We organized workshops, but also we're working with our centers of excellence, which is One Works in Mykolaiv and Norman Foster Foundation in Kharkiv. We're working on pro bono basis on the master planning, where of course the housing is very important part. And we very much agree, very much confirm the importance, I think through the whole seminar today, the importance of engagement of cities and municipalities in this work on the housing. So the importance of multi-level governance, promoting that is very important, and promoting the role of cities and communities in the development, implementation of the housing policy is very much important. All these recommendations on engagement of the cities and communities are especially important today, as I agree that at the opening, it was mentioned that there is a need in actions, there is a need in immediate help to cities to reconstruct from the war-related damages and also accommodate the IDPs. And we agree that the existing structure of only home ownership is far from being sufficient. there is definitely a need, a much wider range of working on different housing tenures. And I hope it would be possible to read again the country profile, because I think there is a lot of details also what we were proposing then, and probably many of these technical recommendations could be still used also today. I also agree that effective planning and zoning of urban development will be very, very important. So the connection on that, for instance, to the urban cadastre will be very, very important. What is also very important is the longer term planning of building capacity. I think report also highlights experiences of Western countries. This is what Julie also presented, that which actually shows the importance of the long-term planning of the housing policies. I also very much enjoyed Anastasia's presentation saying that capacity is the key. What we see in the countries we are working now, and we are working in many other countries, which are EU accession states, you can develop together with international expertise good policies. However, if you don't have enough capacity at the national level for implementation and also dissemination to the local governments, if you don't have these capacities at the local level, these policies will fail. So we need to work together to develop these capacities. So this topic of capacities should not be underestimated, because I'm sure that by our common efforts, we can advise the governments to develop really great laws and regulations. But if there is no capacity for implementation, especially in the context of the EU accession, where requirements of the European Union are very heavy, they require additional capacity to what a usual, state would have. So I think this is where we really need to have more capacity. I was very glad also the Housing 2030 report was referenced in the study. So UNEC is one of the 3 partners to the Housing 2030 study, together with Housing Europe and UN Habitat, and very pleased to see Julie, who was the lead writer for this report. We will be happy to translate the Housing 2030 into Ukrainian so that it would be more accessible to all in the preparation of their work. And just to say that we're really looking forward that all this work is done in line with the UN principles for sustainable housing, including Geneva UN Charter on Sustainable Housing. Our planning of work within the UN for Kharkiv, UN Mykolaiv project will include several activities. We stand ready to comment the draft legislation of the government on housing. We are planning to be engaged in the urban cadastre. We are planning to develop a pilot project on rental housing in the city of Kharkiv. And otherwise, we as United Nations are standing ready to act on request of the governments at the national government and also local government in Ukraine. And thank you again for the opportunity to join this meeting and this network, and looking forward for working together to address this very large scale challenges. Only through cooperation we will be able to address them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gulnara. I would like to, before calling for the new speaker, I would like to remind about the tight timing that we have. We have to be very sharp, and would also invite people to put their questions in the chat. And Alexander, did you manage to fix your technical?
I've changed computers, so can you hear me now? Ah, fantastic.
Great.
No, let me just quickly say, Carolina, the representative, very much wanted to be here today, but had a competing agenda item that she could not get out of, but she asked me to pass on her regards to everyone, and thanks to the organizers for arranging this today. From our side, the topic of the report in this meeting is incredibly timely. The scale of damages and the level of displacement is enormous and has gone up since actually the report was put together. As we know from the second round RDNA, that there's now 1.4 million housing units destroyed, with 135,000 individual homes destroyed. There are 8 million refugees and 5.3 million IDPs. in almost without exception, based on our intention surveys, nearly all put housing and access to property as a precondition for return. 80% of IDPs have cited this as their top need if they're to return and sustain themselves at home, while 62% of refugees said it's very important to them that they can re-access homes and property. I would also highlight the hundreds of thousands of people who are living in collective centers for whom return is unlikely in the near future. And in this regard, I think we very much support the focus in the report on increasing the social housing stock of Ukraine so that the most vulnerable are not left behind and have a safe place to stay. And I think we're encouraged by the range of innovative ideas and emerging practice we're seeing in different parts of the country. UNHCR's leadership in the protection and shelter clusters has given us a unique insight and a fairly strong network and operational role in terms of housing recovery. I think in the past year, nearly 1.2 million people have benefited from emergency shelter kits. And so far, UNHCR and its partners have provided essential support for light and medium repairs to damaged homes to 11,000 families. In addition, 110,000 people have benefited from legal advice and support. And this really underscores, I think, the challenge of housing and property documentation and restoring lost documentation and registering property. I think we would really like to highlight the title of the subtitle of the report, Sharing Knowledge for the Recovery of Ukraine, and how pleased we are to see the inclusive approach taken in this report, the sharing of ideas, the integration of lessons learned from other contexts that could be put in practice in Ukraine. We think it's incredibly important that consultations across civil society take place as we support Ukraine in developing housing policy frameworks that truly work for the people and align with the Build Back Better agenda. I think, let me also just highlight, I think the report's focus on harnessing the rich experience, ideas, and innovations of local organizations, local architects, and urban planners in the design of these policies. As some of you know, UNHCR has recently concluded a memorandum of understanding with the Ministry of Infrastructure on a new initiative called Ukraine is Home to bridge the humanitarian with the longer term development of sustainable social housing solutions. And we look forward to working with many of you on the call today as we take this forward. So let me end there, because I think bearing in mind the instruction to keep within 3 minutes. And thank you all again. I think we find the report really well done and excellent. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexander. And I would like to invite now Vera Witthagen, a policy analyst at European Commission.
Yep. Thank you. You can hear me, right?
Yes.
Yes. Well, thank you for the invitation. I work in the New European Bauhaus unit in the European Commission, and we work closely already on capacity building for municipalities in Ukraine. I will explain a little bit first where I come from, and then how we see the report. So my background, the European Bauhaus, was created to bring the Green Deal, the big transition towards a new society, to bring sustainability and energy efficiency closer to the built environment. And for that, we bring together 3 different values: so sustainability, inclusion, and beauty. So what we try to do is to make a new environment, sustainable environment, more affordable for all, and also making quality housing available for the many. We realize that this can only happen if you do that together with citizens. So to work in a participatory way is very important for the European Commission. citizens need to be involved in planning projects, and it needs to reflect democratic processes. And that can only be done when there's a strong mandate to the local government, and if they are engaged in these kind of processes and can steer new building processes. The EU has as many of you know, a long tradition of helping both national governments and also regional and local governments with their local development plans in cohesion policy, which is actually a big part of the EU budget, and that's what we do on a daily basis. We give, for example, technical assistance for local municipalities to develop their own management. And that's what we also started in Ukraine. So we set up a capacity building program, and we will continue that capacity building program. And we fully endorse the message that the report gives, because we truly believe that building a municipal and government capacity is key. I try to keep it short, so thank you very much.
Thank you. And I would like to invite Diana Bertia, country manager at Council of Europe Development Bank, to give her feedback on the report.
Sorry, Alexandra, I think my colleague might have a problems to connect, so I will represent the Council of Europe Development Bank instead.
Thank you very much.
My name is Samir Kulinovic. I am a senior technical advisor for housing and urban development with the CEB. As some of you may know, the CEB is a multilateral development bank established after the Second World War with the specific objective to help to solve the housing solutions for the displaced person after the war. And since then, we gain experience in post-war housing reconstruction from other countries, including in the Western Balkans, where we have a number of social housing projects in the region today. Thank you very much for this very, very good report. I really liked it, and I looked it through the prism of our experiences and lessons learned so far. Very, very important that this report addresses the vision for the housing system for Ukraine. It's not only a report about the reconstruction, but also to address the all challenges faced by Ukraine in transforming and in establishing the housing system. So it provides all the building blocks, starting from the national framework for housing strategy to financing, providing a very good examples, and to capture, very importantly, administration and management of the housing stock. One of the lessons learned from, let's say, from the reconstruction of the housing from Bosnia and Herzegovina, which was very impacted by the war in ex-Yugoslavia, I see even some similarities. In Bosnia, 30–40% of the housing stock was damaged and needed reconstruction. So it was about over 44,000 housing units. I see the 30–40% of the housing stock being impacted in Ukraine. At least that's how I read it in the conversation. So the numbers are huge. So, and in particular from that perspective, it's very important that this report captures the vision for the housing system that goes beyond the repair, in particularly that the impact of the war is usually underestimated. So, for example, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, we still have collective centers that were established due to the emergency situation during or after the war. There are multiple of generations, new generations being born in these collective centers. They become permanent housing. So I think some of these lessons could be taken, for example, further and elaborated. So to avoid the situation that the the temporary housing becomes permanent housing. We worked, for example, on this clothing collective center project with our UNHCR colleagues in the region who are very well aware of the project. The lack of capacity to implement projects, it was already noted. I think that's very good point and addressed in the report and needs perhaps further elaboration. The other thing is and I think in the report it is noted through the mixed neighborhood and I like the title of the report because it's not talking about houses, it talks about homes. And homes means a lot. It means a neighbor. It means social inclusion. It means to get to work. It means scrolling down to Krushatek Street and going to St. Mihailovska to have a beer in Irish pub in Kiev. That means home. So we're not talking about houses. We talk about homes, and that leads to housing interdependence with overall economic recovery that is planned for Ukraine and being a building block of the overall recovery of Ukraine. That's very important, I think, element that is being touched upon in the report, and I think it's now to Ukrainian colleagues to take it further. And that leads to my final point, and I think that it's ownership of Ukrainian authorities to implement the overall housing recovery of Ukrainian damaged stock and further developing into a housing system is key element. Ukrainians know the best what is their situation and what are Ukrainian needs. We can share our experiences, we can share lessons learned, we will honestly tell where we tripped along the pathway or implementing the projects, what we've seen and so on, but it's really ownership with the Ukrainians, and I think they can do the best together with our support. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Samir. And I would like to invite Rafal Rybaki, the head of public sector at European Investment Bank, to comment on this report.
Hello, everybody. I am Oksana Remiga, and I am working in EIB Bank. I am replacing Rafal Rybatsky during this meeting. And if it is possible, I can make a few comments from our side.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So first of all, thank you very much for the very useful and very interesting study, which is indeed laying out the ground for the further reconstruction of Ukraine following the principle of building back better. European Investment Bank is developing currently the program to finance the priority sectors in Ukraine. And of course, housing is one among our priorities. Currently, we are discussing with the government the possibilities of, kind of finding the niche and finding the instruments to channel the available resources to the owners of the building, to the suffered communities. And in this regard, a report is providing, very important tips about the involvement of local governments or municipalities. There are a number of, concerns which is expressed in the report, which I believe helps to probably fine-tune the program with taking into account the current challenges. And probably I've already put the question which we would like to discuss further in the chat. If it is possible to raise it here, it would be great. It would be a great opportunity. What is the opinion of authors of the report of the expert about the role of energy efficiency fund, which in the reconstruction of damaged housing stock? Definitely, it could play a great role in the working with homeowners associations. But what about the questions which were raised by a number of experts during today's discussion, that homeowners associations are working only in the very limited number of multi-apartment buildings? So what would be alternative, or what would be the kind of the alternative ways? It would be great to get this answer, but probably I will answer and feedback from experts, and probably I will complete my speech, my short contribution, again by thanking those who developed such a comprehensive and thoughtful report, which definitely would help to shape the IFI's assistance, donors' assistance, and help to make rebuild Ukraine really fast and efficient. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I would invite Mai Nguyen, a program manager at the International Finance Corporation, to give her feedback on the report.
Thank you very much. I thought that there will be my colleague from the World Bank before me, but apparently you've given me. I'm happy to give the floor to our colleagues from the World Bank first, if based on your schedule. But as you say.
Yes,
okay.
Happy to step in.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Good morning. It's early morning here in Washington, D.C. My name is Roman Kachar. I represent Ukraine at the World Bank Board of Directors for all institutions, World Bank, IFC, and MIGA, as well as 13 other countries. And since the war started, World Bank was a key financier for Ukraine, delivering more than $20 billion US dollar financing on its own account and jointly with partners. And that accounts for almost half of all financing Ukraine received from abroad since the war started. Thank you for this invitation and the opportunity to speak on the panel, and congratulations on successful report. Great interest. I see how many people are attending, and also gratitude to the governments of Netherlands for sponsoring this report. So it was mentioned, and probably many of you know, World Bank jointly with the government of Ukraine, European Commission, and United Nations prepared the Rapid Damage and Needs Assessment Report, actually the second edition, which identified the total recovery needs of 411 billion as of 1 year of war, as of 24 of February. And housing is about 1/3 of it. But I couldn't agree more with what Ambassador Moll said earlier this morning. It's time to act now. And that's why in the recent edition of the report, it identifies 14.1 billion of immediate recovery needs, which are to be implemented in 2023. And the World Bank, jointly with the government and other partners, are working right now to operationalize this report. This part. Housing is a large component, 1.9 billion in 2023. And the World Bank, the IBRD part, is finalizing the first project of 500 million to support government of Ukraine to finance the housing recovery. On the broader economic landscape, we do see that fiscal space will remain extremely limited for the government, as we see all the domestic resources which Ukraine currently mobilize are channeled to finance the armed forces. And the essential needs of the states is supported by external donors. So the priorities of the government is security, supporting the most vulnerable people through social safety networks, and delivering public services in health and education. So with such priorities, the role of private sector will be key to deliver construction needs, including in the housing. So I'm very happy that Mai is today with us, who represents IFC, the arm of the World Bank, which works with the private sector. And there are, I would outline a few preconditions, just 3 of them. The first one is capacity of local authorities and central government. It was mentioned in the report, was mentioned probably by majority of speakers today. Indeed, it's a key bottleneck, not only in housing, but also in the broader needs. Second is rule of law and property rights enforcement is a major preconditions before any private investments or any other investments can be done. Ukraine made some great progress on this path. Also, Ukraine pioneered in e-government. DIA app became kind of one of the best world practices to show how it can be done. But the broader agenda is still to be implemented, including the foreclosure part. And third one is financial sector development, investors and financial institutions. So development of financial market and access to capital will enable to leverage and to build the housing on a large scale. Private housing will also play, we hope, a key role in poverty reduction. Since war started, the poverty rate in Ukraine went up from 5 to 25% and may reach as high as 50% in the coming year. This is unprecedentedly high numbers. So housing may be a source of wealth for many families. As in, for instance, in US, 1/3 of average household wealth is in its home equity. So while the world is experiencing highest level of inflation, by taking the equity allows to protect household its wealth from inflation. So World Bank will stand ready to support Ukraine both in financing and advisory as long as it takes. Thank you. Bye. And back to you,
Roman and Mai.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Roman. Indeed, I'm very happy to be here representing the private arm of the World Bank Group in this meeting. And in the economy of time, I will not provide comments on the report, which I agree with all the previous speakers, and I have prepared some notes on that. But since it's the same as everybody else, I will only emphasize on a number of things which, in my view, is critical for the housing and affordable housing issue to start now. As the ambassador said, we start doing now. So the thing that really impressed me also in the presentation of Alexander, so everything is already mapped out, but we need to start at the policy level. Unless we have a policy by the government to move in the right direction, and we have a strategy, all the projects that we are implementing now on ad hoc basis have the risk of being ad hoc in the end. And when the policy is passed and there is a strategy, they may not fully fit into the direction where we all would like the government to move, the country move ahead. So it is critical that we will start with the policy and the strategy now. And then the question to my colleagues and to all the participants is how we do that. In this regards, we come to the issue of the capacity building. Capacity building and capacity as such. Perhaps the government would need a lot of technical assistance right now to formulate this policy and the strategy. And someone, I don't know who, perhaps the government, I would say, would need to step up and say that we need this help, let's do it. In the form of a working group, the task force, with the request to the World Bank Group, to the UN agencies, to the donors. Please help us, and we somehow will kickstart this. It is unfortunate that the representatives of the ministry, who is actually in charge of leading this effort, is not here today, but I hope that the message will be passed over to the colleagues. And I have to say, I will make sure that this will be passed. As you know, IFC is acting as the strategic advisor to the government, helping the Ministry of Reconstruction and Infrastructure to identify the sectors where private sector can step in and support the government, in addition to all the donors' support that Ukraine is receiving. And we will be having a reverse mission next week and the week after, and we'll be meeting with the representatives of the ministry, and I'll make sure to mention that, since the housing sector has been prioritized already as the sector where the private sector also can step in and help. So priority with the policy and strategy is key. Another thing that I would like to mention here, which is really important, well, capacity building I mentioned. I also would like to mention is the what the World Bank is actually also already doing is the step related to recycling of the construction and demolition waste. As we know, there is a lot of this in Ukraine, unfortunately, at the moment. And part of the policy will need to be taken to decide to reuse this debris in the reconstruction, using the the existing and new technologies, and the decision will need to be taken now, so that we will not waste resources and time on removing this, and then afterwards we'll decide to reuse it, and the funds have already been spent. So these are the things that I wanted to highlight in relation to the presentation. But I would also like to share that in addition to our role as the strategic advisor to the government on the prioritizing the sector where private sector can be participating, we're also completing the study on affordable housing. So essentially, it's a comprehensive study, and we are finalizing now with ENY. We'll be taking it to the for consultation with stakeholders to see, what models will be suitable for private sector participation through PPPs, essentially. We also are launching a new project. We started discussing the rent-to-own model as the financing option on the demand side, given that when the housing will be built, people will also need to somehow live in them. So in addition to social housing, where the government will be distributing houses to the people that the government believes needs to be supported, like, war veterans and their families, other people will need somehow, to be able to rent and purchase this house. So we'll be looking into that. We're also looking into a new project that will scope new technologies and new materials for the construction of housing in Ukraine. Well, not only housing, but construction sector. And this will obviously be aligned with the, with all the EU policies for green construction. So that probably would answer some of the questions that you're asking.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah.
We are almost out of the time now, but I would still like to invite, last but not least, expert to make a comments on the report is Pierre-François Goffiers, the board member of Housing Europe.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. So my name is Pierre-François Goffiers. I'm the board member of Housing Europe, representing French institutions. I wanted first to express my sorrow for the suffering of the Ukrainian people and my admiration for their resilience and courage. Just to make, I don't know if I can I have made a short presentation. I don't manage. So just I wanted to make a short presentation of Housing Europe. So Housing Europe is a federation of public, cooperative, and social housing institutions, representing 46 institutions, professional federations in 25 countries, and managing, and the members of those federations manage around 25 million homes. So what we can do at Housing Europe, based on the excellent work of the writers of the report, is to provide professional on the feedback, on the operational expertise on how to develop or to implement the recommendations of the report. And we would be, Housing Europe, on their members, would be very happy to provide technical expertise on specific fields based on the experience, on the fact that we are the users of the housing public policies in Western Europe and in Europe. So we would be very happy to provide this expertise in such fields as institution and capacity building, various models of social and affordable housing, or the various models of a rental market, more or less just to implement some of the recommendations of the report, and to have also quality, sustainability, energy sufficiency regulation. On, in particular, maybe something would be more specific for Ukraine is managing the consequences of the former Soviet housing model, given the experience we have from countries such as the Baltic states, Slovakia, Slovenia, or Estonia, which institutions are members of Housing Europe. So I wanted to thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We are out of time, but still it would be polite to answer the questions from the audience. So therefore we will have only two questions, and
no, we won't. We unfortunately do not have time for that.
Okay. Then I would propose we answer this question in a follow-up email that all the participants receive, at least like short answer to the questions that people state in the chat. Yeah, and let's move forward to the conclusions, and I would like to give a floor to Alexandra Anisimov.
Дякую всім ще раз за
Thank you everyone very much for this participation, for your comments and proposals. We are also offering some call for action, some steps we can take in the future, and we understand that our work will have the synergetic effect, and bringing back the focus of this structural framework, maintaining relations with each of the partners and organizations, each doing its own part of work to recover Ukraine. We are striving towards the synergetic effect of our work. And when we talk about to quoting the rapid damage and needs assessment done by the World Bank, I would say that yes, the national program can be too ambitious to start with, but having the framework of the national program as our first focus in the process of working with our partners, we are suggesting to start with a simpler thing, with the thing that would be even more available for the partners, more possible, we must take the building blocks for housing reform and recovery, and we should establish an expert platform for housing recovery for Ukraine, so that the funding that comes to Ukraine could have the best possible effect. And we suggest that 1% would be used to sustain such a platform, so that the 99% of the investment would actually be used to recover Ukraine. And I would call everyone now to dream. So imagine, dear participants, let us imagine what housing in Ukraine could be like in 15 years if everyone gets involved in the system building. What kind of synergy will we have so that we could provide affordable housing which would be built after our victory? And I believe that this vision, this positive thinking about the future will yield great results, and only with joint forces we can achieve something great. And this is the thought that we would like you to keep when we meet on the 27th, 28th of July on the Ukrainian Urban Forum in Vinnytsia, and in autumn, in October, at the Forum of Land and Housing, which is going to be organized by us, New Housing Policy. Well, dear partners, dear colleagues, thank you very much. See you soon to discuss the progress in this sector. Thank you very much, everyone, for participation.
Thank you very much, Alexander. And I would like to thank you, all the organizers of this event, all the institutions that have been involved, and both people you saw on the screen and ones that have been behind the screen, the same as the speakers, commentators, and of course you participants. And we're not going anywhere. We are in Ukraine, and we will keep working on this topic forward, and hope to see you in the following events and joining forces in the following projects to rebuild Ukraine. Thank you. Have a nice day.